What's up, everybody? Trust me, I want Bloodborne 2 just as much as the next guy, but we all know that ain't happening. So we need to get realistic. What is From Software working on next? And what clues have From Software left us as to what their next game will be? As we all know, From Software often leaves clues in their games to hint at what's coming up next, and today I wanted to talk about just that, and how I think the answer is in front of our very eyes, in the form of the ancestral spirit. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the previous hints that From Software has left in their games to give the players breadcrumbs to follow to figure out what's happening next. In 2012, From Software released the DLC for Dark Souls 1, and there was a curious character in there called Chester's. Now, Chester looked really different. He looked like he doesn't belong there, like he's a time traveler. And when you compare him to a hunter from Bloodborne, you can clearly see what's going on. Sure enough, 3 years later after the release of the DLC, Bloodborne came out, and that was the hint for Bloodborne. Now moving on to Elden Ring. Now I know there are other examples, but I'm going to use Elden Ring because it's the most obvious. The hint was actually in Dark Souls 3, and it was specifically, once again, in the DLC, in the form of the Ring City. Now the Ring City looks completely different than any other area in the Dark Souls series. First of all, it literally has the word ring in its name, and second of all, the colors are much brighter, and if you put it side by side with Lindell, you can see that it's the same color palette. So that was the first hint. But the biggest hint came actually in the final boss fight with Slave Knight Gale. Now, Slave Knight Gale's arena was the hint. It is massive. You have never seen a large arena like this in the Soul series up to that point. It was a hint as to what we were to expect from the next game, which was much larger environments with huge boss fights, and that was the clue. Now let's circle back to the next game. What is standing out in Elden Ring? Clearly in Dark Souls 1 it was Chester, and in Dark Souls 3 it was the Slave Knight environment, but what is it with Elden Ring that is standing out? And in my opinion, this is where the ancestral spirit comes in. There is something very odd about this fight that doesn't fit with the rest of the game. Now just listen to the soundtrack. There is something extremely unusual about this soundtrack. It doesn't sound like anything else we've heard in Elden Ring or in Dark Souls or in Bloodborne. The music is almost Celtic, so you hear some harp, you hear a violin, or they call it a fiddle, and you also hear a bunch of little weird forest noises, and that is what really stands out in Elden Ring. And that's why I believe that the next game could be inspired by Celtic mythology. As we all know, in Elden Ring it seems that there are some resemblance between Elden Ring mythology and Norse mythology, as the Yggdrasil and the Erd Tree are both massive trees that give life to the world. So it's not too far-fetched to believe that in the next game they could have something that has to do with Celtic mythology. Now, Celtic mythology is very, very rich. You have interesting characters such as Cleodna, which is supposed to be the queen of the Banshees, and you have Cernunnos, which is a half man, half stag. So I think From Software could draw a lot of inspiration from the Celtic mythology. Personally, I would love to see a From Software game that is deep rooted in nature and see what they could do with that, where you're kind of like in the forest and you never know if there's an ambush waiting by. It could be a very, very tense but beautiful game. So personally, that's what I think could happen with the next game, because this boss fight, this soundtrack, the whole vibe of this boss fight really stood out in my opinion. If you have noticed anything else that might hint to the next game, please let me know in the comment section. And of course, please subscribe to my channel. I'm very passionate about these games and I absolutely love discussing leaks, lores, news, and hidden mechanics. So please subscribe if you want to keep up to date on that. Thanks for watching everybody, and I'll see you guys on the next video.